Matching nostril piercings. You know, nostrils on both sides of your nose. Coming up next, we're going to talk about the advantages, disadvantages, the pros and cons. We're also going to talk about what you should know beforehand, the piercing experience, jewelry, aftercare, healing, living with the piercing, and what happens if you don't want them anymore. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by a Piercer, Season 2, Episode number 81. For those who are new to the channel, welcome to the Body Piercing and Tattooing channel. Hope you're enjoying the videos, finding them helpful and useful, but you may not know who I am. My name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and I operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio, located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. What this is, and we're going to be talking about today, is double nostril piercings or matching nostrils. Basically, they're a piercing on both sides of your nose, done in a way where it looks like they're perfectly symmetrical. That's an illusion because your nose isn't perfectly symmetrical. So we have to adjust it and move it to where it looks like it is. As far as history and background on nostril piercings have been around for about 4,000 or 5,000 years, first recorded in the Middle East. It's mentioned in the Bible even. Genesis 24:22 mentions a ring being through the nose. It has a history in Indian culture that dates back to the 16th century. The tradition within Indian culture is that if the right side is pierced, it will make childbirth easier. Nostril piercings are represented in native tribal cultures in both Africa and South America. Modern times, during the 1960s, the subculture, it became popular to pierce, kind of a more rebellious side of things. That continued probably well into the late 80s, early 90s, and then it became more socially acceptable as the underground subcultures revolving around music became mainstream. Nowadays, it's pretty socially acceptable. Now, let's go into the pros, the advantages, the things that make you go, yeah, I need that in my life. Starting with the fact that they are a lot more socially acceptable than they were 20, 30 years ago. This is not a piercing that's going to get you divorced or fired or kicked off the football team, unless there's a dress code. Number 2, nostril piercings have a long history of healing. This is not experimental. This is not something that's going to take forever to heal. They tend to heal pretty quickly and pretty easily. Number 3, with this, symmetry. A lot of people like symmetry. That we like to match things on both sides. It draws attention, etc. We like it. Large variety of jewelry to use in these. Everything from the threadless ends, which there's probably 20,000 or more different options you could go with, to rings, hinged rings, cat bead rings, etc. Different colors, different materials, different gem settings, different types of settings, different gems. There's a lot of variety that you can put in these piercings. And number 5, it draws attention and enhances that area, makes it more attractive. Now let's move on to the cons, the disadvantages, the things that make you go, no way. I don't want this. The first one being it can affect employment in some cases, or organized activities. And when I say organized activities, I'm talking about usually school activities or activities involving sports or something along that line. Mainly what it comes down to is dress code. If you are involved with any type of employment or activity where there's a dress code, if it says in that dress code you can't have visible piercings, they're going to say, no, you have to take this out. So you need to know that in advance. Do your research. Ask the person in charge. And with both sides being done, it draws even more attention to the fact that you're pierced. Number 2, can't sleep on the piercings. During the healing process, sleeping on the piercing can lead to a great deal of problems. Unless you can sleep like a vampire flat on your back, this may be a problem. You may have to train yourself to sleep differently or arrange pillows or something to keep it off the bed. Take this into account, especially if you decide to do both at once. Oftentimes, it may be a better idea to do one and then do the other, and I'll get into that later. Number 3, cannot wear makeup or cosmetics in the area. You also want to avoid contact with like facial cleansers, etc. So do take that into account beforehand. You may have to deal with shiny nose for a while. Number 4, it is a great deal more noticeable than one side being pierced. You have 2 of them. You add a chain to that or really flashy jewelry, and it's even more, you have your nostril pierced. You need to take that into account beforehand. It can affect some social situations. People are going to be they're going to be noticing it more, and they're going to be asking more questions about it. So prepare for that. That's part of having that piercing. Number 5, the jewelry needs to be oversized for the healing process and downsized during the healing process. We usually suggest downsizing to shorter jewelry in roughly about 6 to 8 weeks. The main reason we have the longer jewelry in there is to allow for the swelling, but once that swelling goes down, having that longer jewelry in there sliding around and getting caught on things is not a good idea. So make sure you downsize. But it's kind of a con because you have to go back to the piercer and you have to buy another piece of jewelry and everything else. Now let's talk about preparing for the piercing and what you should know beforehand. Biggest thing is you need to find a piercer that's well experienced with this particular piercing, knowledgeable, willing to answer a lot of questions, freely gives information and feels like they need to educate you and is very passionate about piercing, and is patient to take the time that it's going to be to mark this correctly so that they are or appear to look even. They should also have a working knowledge of anatomy and different types and what's going to look best, and different jewelry types, what's going to look best. All of these things, and they should also go through the consultation verbally that covers risks, taking care of the piercing, healing times, cross-contamination prevention, checks your anatomy, all of this stuff that you should know before getting it done. The jewelry you choose should be of a high quality and be certified biocompatible materials. Most common, or your go-to on this one, would be titanium. That's what I would suggest. Sleeping. You're not going to be able to sleep on these piercings until they are healed. Plan ahead. Kind of train yourself not to sleep on your nose. If you're a side sleeper or stomach sleeper, figure it out. Sleeping on the piercing will lead to all kinds of problems. The other thing you need to worry about is cross-contamination prevention, and I'll go into that in depth later. Prepare for those things in advance. Get used to having those habits. Your piercer should provide aftercare instructions in writing and also go through it verbally. They should also, as I mentioned already, go through the consultation verbally to give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have, and they should be available for questions or support in the future. And lastly, already talked about this, but the jewelry will probably need to be downsized. We pierce these with studs, long, and then you're going to need to go short. So plan ahead for that. Plan on going back to that piercer within roughly about 6 to 8 weeks. If the piercer's not in that town and there's some traveling involved, you may want to consider trying to find somebody local that has and stocks that type of jewelry. Now let's talk about the piercing experience itself. Most people will say this piercing or this set of piercings is on a scale of 1 or about 2 to 5. And the only reason why we're getting up into that 5 range is because oftentimes the first piercing will hurt a little bit, and then the next piercing will hurt a little bit more. The reason why it varies so greatly is people's sensitivities, their pain experience, how they handle pain, etc., and how they've learned over the years to deal with it. It is not going to be nearly as bad as you think it's going to be. It will probably make your eyes water, as any piercing of the nose and sometimes even the eyebrows will do. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go through a consultation and then covering everything you need to know, in my opinion, before getting the piercing done. Then we're going to go back and select jewelry. With this one, they should make suggestions of what's going to look good as a matching set. They both are going to need to be post jewelry if you're doing both at the same time. Preferably a flatback labrae, and we'll get into that later. However, they should give you some advice on what size is going to look best, what's going to work best, and what's going to be the easiest to heal with. Next up, you sign a waiver or fill out a waiver. It's important that you read the waiver because the waiver can cover some things that maybe you didn't think about, like pre-existing health conditions, medication that you may be on, and all kinds of other things that you need to talk, or allergic reactions and stuff that you need to talk to your piercer about and ask questions. Too often I think we have this habit of just hitting yes, 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 just so we can get to the good stuff, kind of like we do on the internet. Then the piercer will set up their equipment and tools and then disinfect the area and mark them. When marking matching nostril piercings, they should be marked first off from above with the head kind of tilted downward so that you see what it looks like this way, then straight up and down like this way. And the reason being is that oftentimes when I've encountered piercings that don't look like they match, it's mainly they don't look matched when the person is shorter than me or sits down and I look down on them. It's important to get that depth, how far back they are in the nostril set first, and then how high. When you look at the marking, I always suggest doing it up close and then doing it at arm's length, but I also suggest you move your head so that you can get an idea of how that piercing is going to look when people are looking down at you. Not physically, not figuratively. They're not doing that unless you deserve it. I don't know. Once the marking is all done, I'll put you in a reclined position, insert a needle in and through into a needle receiving tube or cork. It depends on the side, and it depends on what the shape of your nose is, personally. Once that's done, the needle is pushed out with a guide pin. I use hemostats to hold the labret stud, and then we push it back through, or connect to the guide pin, push it back through, and then put the end on. One of the uncomfortable parts of this may be having your piercer's finger up your nose. It's not something we normally have, is other people's fingers up our nose. It's kind of an odd sensation, I believe. So then there might be some slight bleeding that needs to be stopped. Usually these don't bleed a lot. It varies. Sometimes we'll hit just that right blood vessel. Then you're done. Go look at your new piercings. It's not unusual to have some throbbing and aching immediately afterwards. That usually lasts a few minutes. The piercing's going to be tender to the touch for a while. If you bump it, you're going to know it, and you need to understand that your body training you to keep things away from it. It's like saying, hey, I'm working here. Leave me alone. And the jewelry, as I mentioned and kind of gone over already, will be loose fitting. Now let's move on to healing. Average healing time on these can be anywhere from, if you're really healthy and you take care of it and don't have any issues and do everything perfectly, maybe around 8 months, but probably closer, or 8 months, what am I saying, 8 weeks, or probably closer to 3 months, 3 or 4 months. Varies from person to person. During which time, I'm going to suggest cleaning twice daily using a sterile saline solution. Personally, I like Neomed's Piercing Aftercare. If you can't find that, you want to mainly look for, it's saline, it's sterile, it's in a pressurized metal can, and when you turn it over on the back and look at the ingredients, all that's in there is purified water and sodium chloride. Nothing else, no additives, preservatives, oils of any type. That should be done twice daily. The other thing I would suggest doing is rinsing under running water at the end of your shower for about 30 seconds. What we're doing with the saline and the running water is we are trying to remove the crusties, the discharge that hardens and collects on the jewelry. And the reason we want it off there is when it moves and shifts, the jewelry does, it can agitate it. It doesn't feel very comfortable, and you may need to make additional room for additional discharge. If you come across a situation where there's a lot of discharge or it's just not coming off, see your piercer, have them clean it for you and take a look at it. There might be another issue going on. The biggest thing is don't run and start using Q-tips to dig around in there, or sharp objects, or what somebody suggested on the internet, like a toothpick. You're going to cause problems. You must practice cross-contamination prevention. That's what keeps you from getting an infection. And that includes washing your hands before you handle it, no oral contact or exchanging of bodily fluids, keeping your environment clean, clothing, bedding, towels, not submerging the piercing in bodies of water you can't control the quality of, which is everything but your own clean bathtub. So basically, no swimming until it's healed. Keep pets away from it. Don't let them sleep in the bed with you, especially those smaller animals like to sleep up on your face. Also, keep cosmetics away from the area, wet hair, anything that comes in contact with it. it's usually best to avoid completely. Masks, if you have to wear them for work or whatever, make sure there's not pressure on the piercing when you put them on, and change them often. If it's one that it's not the disposable type, then I would suggest disinfecting it several times a day. As humans, we like to touch and play with new things. It's just in our nature. Avoid playing with or touching the jewelry or moving the jewelry. There's absolutely no point to that. Don't spin it. Don't rotate it. Don't move it. Leave it the fuck alone. You don't need to touch it. No, don't. Hands off. First 3 to 5 days, you'll experience sometimes slight bleeding off and on, redness, discolorization, heat, tenderness to the touch. If those things happen usually in about that first week, it's not really something you should be concerned about. If it happens like a month into the healing, you need to see a piercer or a medical professional. There might be something else going on. Avoid trauma to the piercing. Avoid contact with the piercing. Isolate them. Keep things away from them. Because even though it feels okay to do that, that doesn't necessarily mean the piercing is healed to a point where it can handle that trauma. In other words, do not sleep on the piercing, no matter how good it feels or it doesn't hurt. The other thing is, it's important to downsize to the shorter piece because it's not only going to make your life easier, it's going to avoid problems with the piercing in the future. Jewelry should be threadless, in my opinion. Titanium. I like threadless labret studs. They can be done with nostril screws or L-bends. They're not quite as secure, and they are more prone to falling out. They also take up a lot more room inside your nose, so they can be a little uncomfortable. If it is a labret stud, it should be threadless or threaded. Internally threaded, that is. Should be at least 20 gauge or larger, though I prefer 18. 18 is kind of a nice size that if you have to take it out for 20 minutes or whatever, it's not going to be a huge issue to get it back in. Jewelry should be oversized for swelling and then downsized within about 6 to 8 weeks, if you hadn't figured that out by now. Jewelry should be left in at all times, only removing it to replace it. I've had clients that have had nostril piercings for years, took them out for a couple hours to see grandma, and had problems getting them back in. If the jewelry is threaded, as in it screws on, you should check those ends or that end on a regular basis. Weekly is your best option, even after the piercing has healed. And that moves us on to living with the piercing. And the first thing I'm going to say is, if you have threaded jewelry, check the ends. Threadless, you really don't have to. It's not a bad idea to squeeze them, kind of, put your index finger against the gem on the outside and find that disc on the inside and kind of squeeze them together, occasionally just to make sure they're seated all the way. But other than that, you really don't have to do as much with them. Continue to avoid stress or trauma to the piercing. Just because it's healed doesn't mean you can start pulling on it or get things caught on it or what have you. Piercings are sensitive. You have hard metal through flesh. The metal is always going to give, the flesh is always going to give before the metal. So avoid anything like that's going to tear the piercing or cause problems. If you notice sudden swelling or discomfort in the piercing, see your piercer. There might be something wrong, or maybe some traumas happen and may have to put a larger piece in to allow for that swelling. Piercings should always be isolated even after the piercing is healed. Baby them. If you want them, keep them safe. That's basically what I'm saying. Leave the jewelry in at all times. A lot of people have this misconception that if they have the jewelry long or piercing long enough, they can just take the jewelry out for a year and put it back in. That's not the case. Nostril piercings in some cases can close pretty rapidly. Now, lastly, let's talk about abandoning the piercing. You've just gotten sick of them. You don't want them anymore. And you decided that you're just not going to have double nostril piercings or matching nostril piercings anymore. So, if there's no sign of infection or other problem, either during the healing process or afterwards, it's not a problem just to remove the jewelry. If you take the jewelry out, the piercing holes will begin to close. If the jewelry's been in for, like you've gone through the healing process, it'll probably look open for much longer than it is, kind of sealing in the center and then filling in outward. If there are any signs of infection or other problem, whether it's healed or not healed, seek advice from your piercer or a medical professional before removing the jewelry. The reason I say that is we don't want to create a situation where we trap an infected or infection inside a piercing. So it's a good idea to have it evaluated and make sure there's not something else going on. Now, piercing scars, especially in a well-healed nostril piercing, can appear open for a long period afterwards. They're not really that overly noticeable because it's kind of a smaller gauge piercing, but it's going to be there for a while. You know, it's just part of abandoning a piercing. Now, if you squeeze the piercing, sometimes this cream cheese stuff comes out and it smells nasty. Basically, what that is sebums. Sebums is a waxy oil that your body produces to oil hair follicles. It also is what makes us watertight, or helps to. It is completely safe, completely normal. I don't understand why you're squeezing an empty piercing. Leave it alone. It'll come off when you clean, when you bathe the next time. Not something you should worry about. Well, that's it. Do you have double nostril piercings? What was your experience like getting them done and having them and wearing them and etc.? Are they your favorite? Are they your least favorite? What have you? If you're thinking about getting it done and I didn't cover a question that you have, please, in both cases, leave a comment. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Take care, and we'll see you in that next video.